Oh, howdy all, grab yourselves a beer. It's time for some Path of Exile discussion. Today, what I wanted to do is outline some of the methodology that's gone into my build planning for a Berserker that I'm intending to maybe run in the middle of the league. So this is not going to be my league start character. This is something I'm considering as a possible second character. And the idea is that it's going to be built around the skill Ground Slam and Vaal Ground Slam. And this is an outline of the passive tree that I would start with. You will obviously change this as you get access to more and better items. So, starting out in the Berserker, we're going to come down and grab some of the life nodes just to get out of that starting area of the tree and pick up more defensive life in this area. We're then going to pick up the butchery section because we're going to be using two-handed weapons. We're also going to be focusing on impaling enemies. We're going to pick up some more life, a jewel socket, and more life again. And we temporarily need to take some intelligence, which is on the way to more life up here. The goal is that there's a couple of stat nodes that are taken in this tree. You want to get rid of those. They're there just so that you can make the build work in the short term. You want to get rid of stat nodes because they don't offer you very much power overall. Secondly, we're going to come out of the Marauder area in a different direction. We're going to pick up this Life Leech with two-handers cluster on the way up to the infamous Scion Life Wheel, one of the most powerful areas on the entire passive tree. While we're in the area, we're going to pick up Forceful Skewering because we're going to be scaling our damage through Impale. We're also going to pick up Berserking, which has been buffed. Berserking now causes you to lose rage 40% slower and grants 10 to maximum rage. This cluster has gone from a mediocre at best, marginal at worst cluster into something truly amazing for a Berserker. Next up, we are going to, as I say, take the entirety of the Scion Life Wheel because the Scion Life Wheel is kind of good. We're going to come down here, pick up the defensive Solar Steel node, and we're going to experiment with Imbalanced Guard. In theory, I think that this node is good. I don't actually know that I'm right. It could well be that I'm overvaluing it. If it doesn't feel like it's adding a lot defensively, then just get rid of it. We'll pick up this life cluster, and then we're going to pick up Call to Arms down here. Call to Arms has some important synergies in this build. We're primarily going to be using Intimidating Cry. Intimidating Cry is a new skill that was added in 3.11, and I'm just going to jump across to it now. Of course, I am recording this before the skills exist in the live server. So, this is Intimidating Cry at level 20 and 20 quality. You'll notice here that it provides debuffs. Firstly, enemies taunted by this Warcry are intimidated. So all enemies that are struck by the expanding line of sonic energy that it looks like, a wave of sonic energy it looks like, that expands out from you as you utter this Warcry, are going to be intimidated and taunted. Taunted means that they will prioritize attacking you. Intimidated means they'll take 10% more physical damage. And we're trying to stack physical damage, so that's a good thing. The buff that it grants you causes your hits to overwhelm physical damage reduction to some extent, which is a huge offensive boost against enemies with solid amounts of armor. Most enemies don't have much armor, but a lot of them do have some, so that's going to be beneficial. The key reason we want to use this, though, is that it exerts the next two melee attacks you perform, excluding Vaal attacks. Now, the Vaal attacks are a thing. You would rather have this exert your Vaal ground slams, but it's not going to do that, so let's not cry over spilt milk. Those attacks deal double damage. So, our goal here is that once per 8 seconds, we've got a button to press, Call to Arms, that makes our next two attacks do a guaranteed double damage. Double damage is a lot, and therefore we're kind of keen to see how that works in practice. So that's the reasoning behind taking Call to Arms. Without Call to Arms, you would be able to weave in additional war cries, and we are going to socket Enduring Cry as well, just for defensive reasons. Although I expect Intimidating Cry will be the main one that we use. You'd have Call to Arms as well, but without Call to Arms, you'd be able to use both of them, but each one would take 800 milliseconds every time you used it. I would rather be able to use it once per 8 seconds and do so without any interruption in my attacks, than be able to use two war cries every 8 seconds. Next, we're going to take this Impale cluster because Impale is a major way that we're going to be scaling damage. Next up, we're going to experiment with the node, the Impaler. This is one that may or may not end up staying in the build. The way that the Impaler works, it provides an interesting effect where when your hits impale enemies, it also impales other enemies near them, and it gives you a significant damage boost if you are striking weak enemies that you'll kill in 2 hits or less, and it also gives you a significant damage boost when you are striking enemies that you are not hitting more often than 5 times in every 4 seconds. If you start hitting monsters much faster than that, you're probably going to want to get rid of this node. Now that's fine. At that point, we're going to be able to pick up some good cluster jewels instead, because cluster jewels are bonkers. We're going to also pick up a number of other nodes in the area. There's another Impale cluster. There's this Warcry cluster, which grants you Warcries exert 1 additional attacks. So instead of having 2 double damage attacks every 8 seconds, you're going to have 3. That's really good. And then we're just going to pick up the good stuff nodes near the duelist start area. Nothing particularly extraordinary there. And there's this Life Leech cluster, and that essentially is the core of the passive tree. Then we're going to pare down the weaker parts of it, which will be a sense of ascertaining, is the Impaler actually working? If the Impaler isn't working in practice, then at that point it gets cut off and we pick up the large jewel socket instead. So that's the basic idea of the build. In terms of the skills that we're going to be using, we'll have Vaal Ground Slam, and we're going to be linking it to the new Fist of War support. So that's one of the new support gems that I can't demonstrate here, but let's jump across to the Path of Exile website where it's outlined. So it is this one here. This causes the first attack that you make in every 1.8 seconds to do tremendous additional damage. Note that your ancestrally boosted slams, they do 2.48 times as much damage as normal. But you can also time this so that these are perhaps the ones that are increased in power by your intimidating cry. And by doing this, you're getting double damage on the attacks that are already dealing 148% more damage. This seems like a really strong combination and one that I'm really keen to use in practice. So that's one of the reasons actually that's pushing me towards the Berserker ascendancy, which we'll get to in a sec, for its Warcry support, and also to the idea of using Intimidating Cry. You'll notice that we're not really scaling critical strikes here. That's just out of a matter of not having enough passive points. If your character gets to level 100 or close to it, then I think you could certainly respec into critical strikes. So we're using Vaal Ground Slam linked to Fist of War support, linked to Brutality, melee physical damage, which is the weakest of these gems and therefore can be left to last. Why is Fire Penetration there? That shouldn't be there. And linked to Impale. So that's a starting 5-link setup. And when you get a 6-link, you have the option of adding another gem on top of this to amp up the damage further. We're using Ground Slam as a primary attack, but we're also going to have Vaal Ground Slam as a backup. And Vaal Ground Slam is phenomenal. It provides a reliable way to stun everything in the game. You can't always use it. You can only store 2 charges of it, and once you use one, it takes a while to regain it. You need to either kill a whole bunch of trash monsters, or alternately, instead of killing trash monsters, you can build up charges on it by dealing damage to unique monsters. But you're not going to get many uses of it. But what it can do is, if you see a boss casting some really dangerous looking spell, interrupt them by slamming the ground and stunning them out of it. Then they will gain 2 to 4 seconds, depending on how powerful the boss is, 2 to 4 seconds of immunity to stuns afterwards, during which you'll need to watch out. In terms of other skills, we're going to be using Pride, Herald of Purity, and Dread Banner as our mana reservations. So Pride causes nearby enemies to take multiplicatively more physical damage. This is, of course, really strong. Herald of Purity has been overhauled considerably in 3.11. It now is a damage multiplier rather than something that adds physical damage to attacks. and it will give you 12% more physical damage. This is great. Additionally, it will cause little minions to spawn. You can link those minions to blind support if you want, and to be honest, that's probably a good idea. We're also going to use Dread Banner as another reservation. This is our last reservation. Only burns 10% of our mana, and it increases our Impale effect, as well as having a range of other useful effects. As a panic button, we have Berserk. Berserk is incredible. So Berserk is a way of burning up all of your character's rage. Rage is a resource that as a Berserker you get your hands on, and you burn 5 of it a second. You need to have at least 5 to start this skill. And while you're Berserk, you deal 20% more damage with attacks and have 20% more attack speed and have other effects. Like, this is just incredible. You know, you're talking adding 50-something% to the amount of damage you're dealing while moving faster so that you can dodge things and while being tankier. There is no way to sustain Berserk forever. However, we have something in the Berserker passive tree that lets us hold Berserk up for quite a while. So in the Berserker section of the tree, we're taking Aspect of Carnage, which is just a massive damage increase, albeit at the cost of me as the player taking more damage. We're then taking Crave the Slaughter to gain rage on hit, and also to then lead us to Rite of Ruin. Rite of Ruin makes our rage deal a lot more damage. So Rite of Ruin puts us in a situation where every 1 point of rage that we have adds 3% increased attack damage. Every 2 points of rage adds 3% attack speed, and every 5 points of rage adds 3% move speed. So with a total of 50 base rage plus the 10 from Berserking, so 60, what we're looking at having here is a total of 180% increased attack damage, 90% increased attack speed, and 36% increased movement speed. That's incredible. We do have a serious drawback. When we're not losing rage, we're losing life every second. Starting at 6% of life a second, that hurts. That hurts a lot. And we have a couple of ways of dealing with that. One of them is this powerful Life Leech cluster here, but we're also going to be dependent upon a Life Flask for situations where we stop being able to leech. But the thing that has the biggest synergies with Rage here is Warbringer. Now, this is the old version of the Warbringer cluster, and it has actually been buffed since this. So this is not the version that's going live. The version that we see here is still pretty good, but the version that's going live is that Warcry sacrifice only 10 rage if you have at least 25 rage, which is just huge. And then exerted attacks deal 50% more damage if a Warcry sacrifice rage recently. So the play pattern is going to be this. Against a weak pack of monsters, you're going to fire off Intimidating Cry if it's off cooldown. Then you will gain rage if you don't have any rage. You'll gain a lot of rage out of the Warcries grant 5 rage per 5 power if you have less than 25 rage. That will rocket you up in the amount of rage that you've got. You will then make your first Ground Slam. It's going to hit lots of monsters, it's going to start you gaining rage, and it's going to also kill lots of the monsters because it's dealing double damage. Then you're going to move on and hit the next pack. That's going to be your play pattern against weaker packs. Against packs that contain at least one really strong enemy, you're going to want to fire off Vaal Ground Slam as your first move. So use your Intimidating Cry first, then fire off Vaal Ground Slam. It won't be empowered, it won't deal double damage, but then you'll have 3 Ground Slams that will all deal double damage, and you should be able to get them all off while enemies are still stunned from the first Ground Slam. So at least that's the idea in theory. All of these attacks will be made with 50% more damage because you've just sacrificed rage recently, unless this was the first encounter in the map. Anyway, that's my basic thoughts. Critical strikes are something that could come later. In terms of gear, I haven't used anything impressive at all. You'll see there's no flasks at all. My dual sockets are empty, and all I'm using is life and resist gear, except for these vulnerability on hit rings, and then everything else pretty much is just stuff that you can easily get your hands on. Nothing is particularly good. This maul is pretty good without being extraordinary, and a lot of the mauls in the game are getting overhauled, so the currently Path of Building doesn't have them. The key is going to be then to go into cluster jewels. Cluster jewels for this would be an entire additional video, and I wanted to keep this one short and sharp because cluster jewels is something I will explore as and when I play this build. Anyways, hopefully this gives a bit of a sense as to an outline that you can start with for a Berserker that uses Ground Slam and Warcries. If you've got any comments or questions though, definitely fire away below. Otherwise, I'm going to leave it there, and I hope you have a good one.